On the northern edge of the Indian subcontinent, Alexander the Great's army clashed with King Porus' forces in a battle that shook the ancient world. Time may have buried the details of this conflict, but we can still glimpse ancient Indian warfare through this encounter. Alexander, heir to the Persian Empire, marched not just for conquest, but to showcase his ambition as a world conqueror. His troops, after traversing deserts and scaling mountains, finally reached the Indus River Valley. King Porus was no pushover. As a native Indian ruler, Porus leveraged local resources to amass a large army and prepared to face Alexander using traditional Indian war tactics, the elephant phalanx. Compared to Alexander's elite forces, Porus's army was larger and full of local flavor. Elephants, chariots, and soldiers armed with long spears and bows formed layered defenses. Porus saw elephants as the core of his army, thinking they could dominate the battlefield, especially against Alexander's light cavalry and archers. However, Alexander's smarts truly shone in this battle. Faced with King Porus's massive army, Alexander didn't confront it head-on. Instead, he cleverly used the strategy of drawing the enemy in. He ordered his troops to spread out and feigned retreat, luring Porus's forces into a prearranged battleground. As Porus's army pursued, Alexander's elite forces swiftly regrouped using the changing terrain and launched a rapid, fierce attack on Porus's flank. Alexander's cavalry, like lightning, struck at the weak points of Porus's army and quickly split the enemy lines. The battle was exceptionally fierce. Although elephants were powerful, they lacked the mobility of light cavalry and archers. Alexander's forces, through precise tactics and agile maneuvers, continuously weakened Porus's army. When King Porus saw his forces crumbling, he decided to personally lead the remaining troops in a final desperate resistance. But faced with Alexander's encirclement, he was ultimately captured. Alexander did not kill Porus, but showed leniency, treating him as a noble enemy. This decision, while not changing the war's outcome, became a legendary tale. Alexander's victory had a profound impact on subsequent history. He not only defeated Porus, but also demonstrated a new military philosophy. His tactics greatly challenged India's traditional warfare methods, exposing the vulnerability of Porus's elephant phalanx when facing agile troops. Fast forward a few centuries, the Indian subcontinent witnessed a conflict of a different nature, the invasion led by Muhammad Ghori's Islamic forces. At the end of the 12th century, Ghori, a ruler from what is now Afghanistan, crossed the Himalayas with his powerful cavalry and archer forces. His goal was to conquer the fertile lands of northern India and establish a solid foundation for the Islamic Empire. Ghori's first major battle took place in 1191 against the Rajput coalition. In this battle, Ghori showcased his military wisdom and organizational skills. Despite the Rajput army's large numbers, Ghori cleverly used formations and tactics, leveraging the cavalry's rapid mobility and the archers' long-range striking power to break through the enemy's defenses. His troops were not only brave in battle, but also well-trained, gradually giving Ghori an edge over the local rivals. However, Ghori did not rest on his laurels after one victory. He continued his southward advance, gradually occupying large swaths of northern India. Unlike Alexander, Ghori focused more on gradually gaining territorial control rather than pure military confrontation. Through successive military strikes, he brought multiple Indian regions under Islamic rule, breaking the local traditional feudal forces. Ghori's success lay not only in his military victories, but also in the profound impact of Islamic culture and military systems he brought, making the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate a new chapter in Indian history. As time went on, Islamic influence in India deepened. Successors to Ghori, such as the Delhi Sultanate rulers Iltutmish and Kaikabad, continued to advance the Islamization process, strengthening military organization and governance. When facing Mongol invasions, the Delhi sultans did not blindly engage in battle, but employed tactical arrangements and flexible defense to successfully repel this powerful northern enemy. In this cultural and military game, Islamic culture gradually permeated India's political, military and social structures influencing the military landscape and tactical arrangements of the entire Indian subcontinent. With Muhammad Ghori and his successors' continuous conquests, India faced increasing impacts from external forces. Following the success of Muhammad Ghori's conquests, the establishment of the Delhi Sultan marked a new era. Under his leadership, Islamic influence rapidly expanded across the Indian subcontinent, altering India's political and cultural landscape. After Ghori's death, his ministers and descendants continued military expansion in India, particularly the several sultans of the Delhi Sultanate, who gradually gained control over most of northern India through their powerful military forces. However, the wars of this period were not limited to mere conquest. They gradually evolved into deep-seated conflicts of culture, religion, and politics. In 1211, Muhammad Turk of the Ilkhanate was appointed the first true sultan of the Delhi Sultanate, signifying a further strengthening of Islamic forces in the region. Over the following decades, multiple Islamic empires gradually emerged, especially the army of the Turkic dynasty, which established a relatively solid defense system and consolidated their control over Delhi through military successes and political alliances. Nevertheless, India's traditional kingdoms did not submit willingly. Over the next few centuries, conflicts between local Indian kingdoms and Islamic forces continued across the country. The most famous instance was at the end of the 13th century when various tribes of the Rajput kingdom united to challenge the rule of the Delhi Sultanate. The wars of this period were not merely military confrontations, but also competitions between cultures, religions, and ethnic groups. Rajput warriors fought fiercely against Muslim armies with immense courage and indomitable spirit. Their tactics relied not only on strong ground combat forces, but also extensively utilized local flavor. Troops such as elephant soldiers and chariots. One of the most historically significant events was the 1192 Battle of Tarain, where Delhi Sultan Muhammad Ghori confronted Prince Prithviraj of the Rajput tribes. This battle was not only a contest of military strength between the two sides, but also a clash between two different civilizations and cultures. The Rajput army, commanded by Prince Prithviraj, had strong combat capabilities. Although Ghori's forces were fewer in number than the Rajputs, he ultimately defeated the Rajput troops with more advanced tactical deployments and flexible command. The victory at Tarain consolidated the Delhi Sultanate as rule over northern India and dealt a significant blow to Indian indigenous culture. Although the Rajput tribes were not completely defeated, their power gradually weakened, and they eventually could only maintain their status in certain remote areas. Behind the battles lay impacts far beyond soldiers and territory. They brought about profound social changes. India's traditional feudal system began to collapse, while Islamic administrative systems gradually infiltrated Indian society. Local warlords and nobles had to accept the new rulers, and religious differences became increasingly acute. Under the Delhi Sultanate's rule, Islam gradually gained the upper hand, triggering long-lasting religious tensions and social conflicts. These tensions were not limited to hostility between Muslims and Hindus, but also involved disputes and political struggles between different Muslim sects. Despite this, Muslim rulers did not focus all their energy on suppressing Hindus. Instead, during certain periods, they adopted policies of tolerance. For example, in some regions, rulers of the Delhi Sultanate attempted to ease relations with local kingdoms through political marriages and cultural exchanges. Through these measures, the Indian subcontinent gradually developed into a multicultural mosaic, with Islam and Hinduism influencing and integrating with each other. However, over time, India's geographical advantages and complex social structure again presented opportunities for external invaders. Particularly in the early 15th century, Mongol invasions became another significant turning point in Indian history. The Mongols, since Genghis Khan, had swept across most of Central and West Asia. Their tactics were highly intimidating, renowned not only for their cavalry but also for their strong expeditionary capabilities, which enabled them to breach almost all defensive lines. After Genghis Khan's death, The Mongol Empire split into several khanates, but its expansionary momentum did not cease. By the late 13th century, the descendants of the Mongol Empire continued to expand eastward and had begun military contact with India. As early as the 1260s, faced with this external threat, the Delhi Sultans realized that the Mongols' military power was far beyond that of previous enemies. The speed and mobility of the Mongol cavalry made traditional warfare seem somewhat inadequate. To counter the Mongol threat, the Delhi Sultans not only strengthened defensive works but also adjusted the army's structure and combat tactics. For instance, in several campaigns of the 1260s, Delhi Sultan commanders began to try using more firearms and designed more complex defensive tactics based on the characteristics of the Mongol cavalry. Ultimately, after several intense confrontations, the Mongol offensive gradually lost momentum. The Delhi Sultans successfully repelled the Mongol invasion through flexible tactics and political means. But this also sowed hidden dangers for later history. The Mongol invasions not only challenged India's traditional tactics, but also led the Delhi Sultans to reflect more on guarding against external threats. These reflections ultimately influenced the transformation of India's military system in later periods. With the arrival of the 5th-10th century, the Indian subcontinent entered a new phase, the rise of the Maratha Empire. Initially a local armed force, the Marathas rapidly expanded, and the Maratha Empire gradually became a significant military power in southern India. The Maratha army was famous for its excellent horsemanship and mastery of terrain. Unlike traditional infantry combat, the Maratha cavalry placed great emphasis on mobility and flexibility. Their tactical approach gave them an advantage in battles against other forces. As the Maratha Empire continued to develop, military conflicts with other dynasties, especially Muslim empires, became increasingly intense. The Maratha army not only innovated tactically, but also gradually formed a unique strategic system. In confrontations with the Delhi Sultanate, the Marathas' guerrilla tactics and swift cavalry forces posed a headache for the rulers of the Delhi Sultanate. In conflicts with the Mughal Empire, the Marathas demonstrated their tenacious survival and innovative tactics in prolonged wars. During this period, military conflicts in India were no longer limited to struggles between external conquerors and local forces, but evolved into regional power struggles and battles for dominance. With the rise of the Maratha Empire, the military landscape of the Indian subcontinent underwent profound changes once again. The Marathas, though initially a local armed force, gradually emerged over time. Relying on their highly mobile and flexible cavalry, they became a prominent force. Conflicts between the Maratha army and other powers in India, particularly Muslim dynasties, became a significant chapter in Indian history. Maratha military strategies largely diverged from traditional infantry combat. Through agile guerrilla tactics and highly mobile cavalry forces, they continually exerted pressure on other powerful dynasties. Among these, the most famous were the conflicts between the Marathas and the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire, inheriting the legacy of the former Delhi Sultanate, became one of the most powerful empires on the Indian subcontinent. Its rulers, such as Babur, Akbar, and Shah Jahan, with their mighty armies and well-established administrative systems, almost brought the entire Indian subcontinent under their rule. However, as the empire expanded, military pressures and resource allocation became significant challenges for the Mughal Empire. Particularly with the rise of the Marathas, the Mughal Empire had to adjust its strategies. One of the Maratha Empire's military advantages was its familiarity with the local geography. Unlike the Mughal Empire's heavy infantry formations, Maratha cavalry excelled at maneuvering through terrain, especially in the western Indian mountainous regions. Maratha forces could swiftly traverse rugged terrain, bypass enemy defensive lines, and strike at weak points. The most famous conflict occurred in 1681 when Shivaji Maharaja, the father of the Maratha leader Sambhaji, led the Maratha army in fierce battles against the Mughal Empire in the Maharashtra region. Shivaji not only achieved remarkable victories with his exceptional military talent, but also, with his ingenious strategies and extraordinary courage, made a landmark change to the entire military situation in India. Shiva Maharaja inflicted heavy blows on the Mughal Empire's massive forces with his highly mobile cavalry. Unlike the regular Mughal army, the Maratha forces employed continuous small-scale raids and constant harassment, leaving the Mughal troops exhausted and unable to launch effective counterattacks. Shivaji's victory was not only a triumph in battle, but also a significant impact on the traditional tactics of the Mughal Empire's army. It also indicated a shift in the military landscape of the Indian subcontinent. The key to Shivaji Maharaja's success lay in his flexible troop deployment and profound understanding of the battlefield. He well knew that against a massive enemy like the Mughal Empire, conventional positional warfare could not lead to victory. Therefore, he skillfully employed agile guerrilla tactics to disrupt enemy deployments and achieved precise strategic objectives, ensuring that every battle for the Maratha Empire had a clear purpose and direction. Shivaji was not only a military commander, but also a politician. He successfully integrated the Maratha Empire's military achievements with its political goals, ultimately driving transformation across India's western regions. However, as the Maratha Empire gradually expanded, the wars on the Indian subcontinent evolved into conflicts between different ethnic groups and cultures. Especially with the rise of the British East India Company in the mid-18th century, external forces intervention further complicated India's military landscape. The British East India Company, initially established for trade, gradually developed into a militarized empire. Leveraging its maritime and land military advantages, it infiltrated various regions of the Indian subcontinent and engaged in multiple fierce conflicts with local kingdoms. The British military was a force to be reckoned with, boasting a powerful navy and a strong regular army on land. Unlike the traditional Indian armies, the British East India Company focused on military training, organization, and discipline. Their way of fighting was quite different from the guerrilla tactics used by Indian forces. British troops typically relied on tight formations, heavy infantry, and firepower, which gave them an edge over traditional Indian armies. After the 7 Years' War, the British East India Company became even more efficient in military management and standardized combat methods. They gradually defeated major Indian kingdoms and gained control over large parts of the Indian subcontinent. As the British East India Company's military expansion continued, India's traditional armies suffered heavy blows. Despite resistance from regional powers such as the Marathas, Bengal, and the Sikhs, their ability to withstand European colonial military superiority gradually diminished. By the early 19th century, with Britain's progressive colonization of India, the subcontinent's military landscape underwent fundamental changes. Local kingdoms and empires, whether remnants of the Mughal Empire or the Maratha Empire, failed to unite effectively against British aggression, ultimately leading to Britain's complete victory. Although in the mid-19th century, India witnessed a large-scale rebellion, the Indian Rebellion of 1857, it failed to alter the colonial situation. While the rebellion temporarily shook British rule in the long term, it did not achieve Indian independence, but instead accelerated Britain's complete control over India. The rebellion's failure marked the final transformation of the Indian subcontinent's military landscape. India was not only placed under British rule, but also saw its military system largely restructured by the British colonial government. However, India's military history did not end with colonization. With the rise of Indian nationalism, especially in the early 20th century, India began to undergo a new military and political transformation. The Indian independence movement and struggles against British rule propelled the rise of indigenous forces. New military strategies and capabilities gradually emerged, laying the foundation for eventual independence. From this, we can observe the profound evolution of India's military history from ancient times to the modern era. From Greek invasions and Islamic conquest to the rise of the Maratha Empire and British colonial expansion, each historical event is deeply intertwined with India's culture, politics, and military traditions. These military conflicts not only shaped India's history, but also influenced the development of global military strategies and tactics. As the 19th century progressed, British control over India gradually strengthened, leading to profound changes in the subcontinent's military landscape. Despite enduring numerous wars and resistances, India's traditional kingdoms and empires gradually lost their capacity for independent military strength when facing the increasingly powerful European colonial powers, particularly Britain. The British East India Company relied not only on its vast naval power, but also on advanced firearms, strict military discipline, and systematic tactics, which placed India's traditional armies at a growing disadvantage on the battlefield. The British East India Company's initial military superiority stemmed from its powerful navy. Naval dominance allowed Britain to easily mobilize troops and supplies, and effectively blockade coastal regions, posing a significant threat to inland kingdoms. Meanwhile, Britain's army began to gradually infiltrate India's interior. By establishing military bases, training troops, and organizing military operations, the British East India Company gradually brought Indian territories under its control. In conflicts with traditional Indian armies, the British East India Company demonstrated its formidable advantages. In the early wars, Britain swiftly defeated local indigenous forces through efficient military management, a tight command system, and innovative tactics. For instance, during the 1761 Battle of Panipat, when the Maratha Empire attempted to challenge the remaining forces of the Mughal Empire through a coalition, the British East India Company seized the opportunity to intervene. Through carefully planned military strategies, it ultimately defeated the Maratha coalition. This victory marked Britain's growing prominence in India and the beginning of its establishment of military superiority. As British control over India deepened, the British adjusted their military strategies. In the early 19th century, conflicts between local Indian powers and the British East India Company intensified. The most typical example was the Battle of Plassey in 1757. This battle was not only a military conflict, but also the start of Britain's comprehensive penetration into India's political, economic, and military systems. By gaining control of the Bengal region, the British East India Company acquired substantial wealth and resources, enabling it to deploy more military forces across India and consolidate its rule over the following decades. However, India's traditional military forces did not abandon resistance entirely. The Maratha Empire, despite losing much territory after the 7 Years' War between Britain and France, still maintained considerable resilience. The Marathas' guerrilla tactics remained highly threatening during this period, especially in engagements with the British East India Company. Relying on their familiarity with the terrain and rapid mobility, Maratha cavalry forces frequently caused trouble for British troops. Yet, with more advanced military equipment, a systematic command structure, and training, the British East India Company ultimately gained the upper hand in the wars. Although the Maratha Empire no longer had the capacity to conquer other regions, its military power still exerted influence in certain parts of the Indian subcontinent. At the same time, other Indian kingdoms, such as the Sikh Empire in Bengal, attempted to resist British military aggression to varying degrees. The Sikh Empire, located in today's Punjab region of India, posed a significant challenge to the British East India Company with its powerful army and highly organized military system. Sikh soldiers were renowned for their toughness and bravery, particularly the mobility and tactical flexibility of the Sikh cavalry, which put immense pressure on British forces. In several wars against the Sikh Empire, the British East India Company despite its superiority in firearms, still faced considerable difficulties due to the Sikhs' tenacious resistance and agile combat methods. By the mid-19th century, the situation on the Indian subcontinent had changed. India's resistance movement gradually evolved into a nationwide struggle for independence. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, known as the Great Rebellion in Indian history, was not merely a military confrontation, but also a pivotal moment marking the awakening of the Indian people and the rise of national consciousness. Although the rebellion ultimately failed, it profoundly revealed the contradictions and issues under British rule in India, and laid the groundwork for the emergence of India's national independence movement. The outbreak of the Indian Rebellion of 1857 stemmed from multiple factors, including the Indian populace's deep resentment toward the British East India Company's tyranny and the unfair treatment of Indian soldiers. Particularly the religious, cultural, and social oppression by the British colonial government sparked widespread discontent among the Indian people. Against this backdrop, armies and civilians from various regions of India rose in revolt, with some local rulers even joining the resistance. However, due to the lack of unified leadership and effective coordination, the rebellion ultimately failed to succeed. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 heralded the Indian national independence movement and provided valuable lessons for subsequent anti-British struggles. Despite the rebellion's failure, British rule over India persisted. Yet, the uprising made the British government more acutely aware of the complexity and fragility of the situation in India. Consequently, the British government began to strengthen its military and administrative control over the subcontinent. During this period, India not only suffered military setbacks but also endured more stringent political governance. However, as history has proven, oppression did not extinguish India's spirit of resistance. In the early 20th century, with the deepening of British colonial rule, the Indian people's desire for independence grew increasingly strong. Indian intellectuals began advocating nonviolent protest, with Gandhi's nonviolent non-cooperation movement becoming a significant symbol of the Indian nationalist movement. Through nonviolent means, the Indian people successfully undermined the foundations of British rule in India, paving the way for eventual independence. In 1947, after prolonged struggle and changes in the international landscape, India finally gained independence, bringing an end to Britain's 2-century-long colonial domination. Nevertheless, the stories of military conflicts, power struggles, and cultural clashes from this historical period continue to profoundly influence contemporary Indian society. India's military history is not merely a chronicle of wars and strategies. It is a grand narrative of national unity, cultural integration, and the pursuit of independence. By the late 19th century, British colonial rule had permeated every aspect of Indian society. Despite the emergence of Indian resistance movements and uprisings, the British East India Company, armed with advanced military equipment and training systems, gradually gained control over most of the Indian subcontinent. Concurrently, India's traditional military culture and structure underwent significant transformation. From diverse local powers to the forced adoption of an external military system, India's military tactics and strategies continue to evolve. However, India's military strength did not entirely lose its will to resist. Although the Indian military was suppressed following the failure of the 1857 Indian Rebellion, and traditional military organizations were weakened, these historical legacies did not lead to India's complete submission to British rule. Even as India's anti-British movement entered the 20th century, the spark of resistance continued to be ignited among the populace. Gandhi's nonviolent resistance movement, though not employing direct military force, could still shake the foundations of British colonial rule through mass collective action, especially through social movements such as non-cooperation campaigns and the Salt March. Relations between the Indian people and the British colonial government became increasingly tense and complex. Nevertheless, even with these nonviolent methods, India's resistance forces still faced intense military suppression. The British Army, with its powerful firepower and well-trained soldiers, maintained absolute military superiority in India. Employing modern weapons and tactics, the British preserved their air and naval dominance over India, while India's traditional armed forces remained unable to compete. The British military training system and its tight organizational structure were unmatched by India's forces at the time, particularly in terms of technology, command, and equipment on the battlefield. But history is always evolving. After World War II, a wave of anti-colonialism swept the globe, bringing more international attention and support to India's independence movement. At the same time, Britain's colonial system faced growing pressure from all sides. In particular, Britain's post-war economic slump made it impossible to sustain its vast colonial empire. Against this backdrop, India's independence struggle gradually shifted from the military to the political sphere. Gandhi, a key figure in Indian nationalism, although advocating nonviolence, insisted that nonviolent non-cooperation could compel Britain to leave India. On the other hand, despite long-term suppression, India's military forces, having undergone training and modernization during British colonial rule, gradually accumulated rich combat experience. After independence, many officers and soldiers who had fought for India's freedom played a pivotal role in the growth of India's army, which became a strong pillar of the independent nation. Despite the twists and turns on the path to independence, the Indian people's longing for freedom remained undiminished. In the early 20th century, Indian society began to experience unprecedented changes. As the British colonial government weakened, India gradually became one of the key representatives of the global anti-colonial struggle. Many countries and nations' anti-colonial movements during this period received a positive response. Through persistent resistance against Britain's powerful colonial machinery, India not only achieved political independence, but also established a relatively independent military force, gradually participating in the transformation of global military strategy. Meanwhile, India's traditional military culture and art of war, after numerous battles, evolved into a unique military tradition. From the tactical layouts of early Indian kingdoms on the battlefield to the flexible mobility of Maratha cavalry, and the tenacious resistance of the Sikh Empire, India's military culture underwent a transformation from tribal to imperial. These military experiences played a significant role in the military construction of independent India, especially in the formulation of India's defense and security policies. India's unique military thinking gradually became a core element of national development. Particularly after independence, India's military system interacted profoundly with the global strategic system. The newly born Indian government had to address military conflicts with neighboring countries, especially Pakistan, while also seeking its place on the global military stage. The partition of India and Pakistan in 1947 directly led to multiple military conflicts between the two nations. As the Kashmir issue became more complex, India's army had to participate in several border conflicts, which had a profound impact on India's military strategy and political system. Entering the Cold War period, India's military strategy became closely intertwined with the global power game. Adhering to a non-aligned policy, India developed autonomous military capabilities despite maintaining certain military cooperation with the Soviet Union. It achieved significant breakthroughs in nuclear weapons and missile technology. During this period, India not only strengthened its conventional military forces, but also gradually elevated its military strategy to a global perspective through continuous development of military technology. India's military history, from the initial confrontations between ancient kingdoms and external invaders to the rise of the Maratha Empire, Muslim dynasties' campaigns, the long-term struggle against Britain, and finally the journey towards modernization and self-construction after independence, reflects how an ancient civilization has undergone continuous conflict and transformation to shape its present-day defense forces. This history is not merely an epic of wars, but also a brave trajectory of the Indian nation steadfastly moving toward the future amidst storms. Thus, India's military history has become a symbol of its independence and self-strengthening, offering the world a profound textbook on resistance, wisdom, and transformation. Each war and campaign is a reflection of India's culture, ideology, and strategy, embodying the sacrifices and dedication of countless heroes who fought for freedom and belief. As history marches on, India's military strength continues to grow. With the evolution of the global strategic landscape, India will undoubtedly play an increasingly significant role on the historical stage in the future. As British colonial rule deepened, India's military landscape underwent a seismic shift. By the end of the 19th century, although India's military forces remained intact, they were suppressed by the British Army's superior weaponry, training systems, and efficient command structures. Many traditional Indian military strategies and tactics gradually fell by the wayside. Meanwhile, the British East India Company and the subsequent British colonial government intensified their control over India's military system, gradually assimilating Indian forces into the British military framework. Despite this, India's military traditions and fighting spirit did not vanish. As evidenced in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, numerous Indian kingdoms still resisted the British Army with their armed forces. For instance, the Sikh Empire in multiple early 19th century wars, despite facing a formidable British military, repeatedly exerted significant pressure on the British East India Company with its powerful cavalry and agile tactics. The Sikh Empire's formidable combat strength, particularly its elite cavalry units, exemplified the tenacious vitality of India's traditional military forces. However, as the British Army gradually gained the upper hand, India's military forces had to confront drastic changes. After consolidating control over India, the British colonial government meticulously designed a military system that transformed Indian forces into a tool for British overseas aggression. A large number of Indian soldiers participated in British military campaigns, whether in Africa, Afghanistan, or other regions. Indian troops were dispatched to the front lines, becoming a crucial component of the British Empire's world-conquering army. Despite their repeated excellence in warfare, these soldiers received no rewards commensurate with their bravery, instead feeling oppressed and discontented. Entering the 20th century, as the British Empire faced growing global political and economic pressures, India's independence movement became increasingly urgent. In 1919, following the passage of the Rowlatt Act, anti-British sentiments among the Indian people erupted. Indian soldiers in the army and civilians began to more intensely resist the oppression of the British colonial government. Influenced by this movement, India's military structure began to undergo changes. The awakening of Indian people's national consciousness led them to reflect on their relationship with the British Army. During this period, some senior officers and soldiers in the Indian Army gradually felt the helplessness and indignation of being part of the colonial system. After the outbreak of World War II, India's military history entered a new turning point. As war erupted, Britain required more troops to meet the global wartime demands, leading to further conscription of the Indian Army. Despite the repeated excellence of Indian soldiers on the battlefield and their earning of international respect, the Indian people still did not achieve political and military equality. After the war, the British Empire gradually lost effective control over India due to post-war economic difficulties. At this time, India's independence movement reached a new climax. On August 15, 1947, India finally achieved independence, breaking free from 2 centuries of British colonial rule. Following independence, India's military system began to reorganize in the face of numerous external and internal challenges. The new Indian government recognized that although independence was achieved, India still faced significant military challenges. First and foremost was the ongoing border conflicts with neighboring Pakistan. particularly the Kashmir issue, which became the focal point of military confrontation between the two countries. India's combat experience in Kashmir profoundly influenced its subsequent military strategy and tactics. In the 1950s, India had to address border issues with Pakistan while also confronting threats from neighboring China. In 1962, India and China engaged in a border war. Despite the Chinese Army's tactical and equipment edges leading to a major defeat for India in this conflict, the Indian military learned from the experience and began to gradually enhance its military strength. In the following years, the Indian military not only improved its weaponry, but also accelerated the development of military technology, especially achieving breakthroughs in nuclear weapons, which elevated India's military power to new heights. Over the years, India's military forces have gradually modernized. Particularly with the development of nuclear weapons, India has become one of the world's significant military powers. India has not only strengthened its conventional military forces, but also made remarkable progress in multiple fields, such as missile technology, air power, and naval strength. At this point, India is no longer a country solely reliant on external support, but has evolved into a military power with strong self-defense capabilities and global influence. However, India's military history has not been without challenges. Conflicts with neighboring Pakistan have remained unresolved, especially with the dispute over the Kashmir region still pending. Pakistan's military forces have also gradually strengthened to a certain extent, and India-Pakistan relations remain tense. The 1965 and 1971 wars, particularly the 1971 India-Pakistan War, marked a significant breakthrough for India's military forces. In this war, India not only successfully supported the independence of Bangladesh, but also thoroughly defeated the Pakistani army, securing an important military victory. In 1974, India successfully conducted its first nuclear test, becoming the sixth country in the world to possess nuclear weapons. India's nuclear capabilities have positioned it importantly in international military strategy, making it a key player in global strategic games. Subsequently, India has continued to strengthen military cooperation with other major powers, especially under the backdrop of US-India military collaboration, with India's military influence in Asia and globally steadily rising. Entering the 21st century, India's military power has entered the global forefront. India actively develops high-tech weapon systems, including stealth fighter jets, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and submarines, further enhancing its global military standing. Additionally, India has increased investment in military modernization, carried out structural reforms of its armed forces, improved command efficiency, and strengthened external military cooperation. India is not only active on traditional battlefields, but is also gradually participating in international affairs such as peacekeeping missions, becoming an important member of the international community's military forces. India's military history, from ancient foreign invasions to British colonial rule and self-construction after independence, has undergone a long and winding path. Despite facing challenges of varying degrees in different historical stages, the Indian nation's resilient spirit and ever-evolving military strategy have never been lost. From the Maratha Empire to the Sikh Empire and then to the Indian military after independence, India's military history is not only a memory of wars, but also a chronicle of a nation's rise from confusion to strength. Today, India has become a nation with formidable military power. Its military traditions, wisdom, and spirit still deeply rooted in this ancient land. Whether recalling its war-filled past or looking forward to an innovative and transformative future, India's military history consistently exemplifies the courage and wisdom of the Indian people, composing an inspiring epic of heroism for the world. Since entering the 21st century, India's military forces have gradually evolved into one of the world's significant military powers. Despite a history replete with battles and conflicts through the efforts of generations since independence, India has not only made remarkable progress in conventional military strength, but also achieved a globally leading position in nuclear weapons, missile technology, and cyber warfare. As a vast developing country, India's military strategy has gradually shifted from defense to a more globally oriented strategic layout, particularly enhancing its influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Following the Cold War, the world order underwent tremendous changes. As an advocate of the non-aligned movement, India's foreign policy, while adhering to independence and autonomy, has also gradually adjusted its military relations with other major powers. Most notably, military cooperation with the United States has deepened, especially in the early 21st century. Against the backdrop of intensifying terrorism and regional conflicts, India and the US have strengthened cooperation in counterterrorism, maritime security, information technology, and other fields. The US not only views India as one of the key forces to check China's rise, but also assist India in aligning with international military technology. With the rapid development of information technology, the Indian military has begun to extensively introduce modernized combat systems and weaponry. From advanced fighter jets like the Rafale to domestically developed Tejas light combat aircraft. From electronic warfare systems to precision-guided weapons, India's defense industry is thriving. Many high-end weapon systems no longer rely on imports, but are gradually achieving independent production capabilities. Particularly in missile technology, India has achieved remarkable accomplishments. The development of India's Ugni series of medium-range ballistic missiles, the Pralaya missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and submarine-launched missiles has elevated India's nuclear deterrence capabilities to world-class standards. India has become the sixth nuclear-armed nation globally, and its nuclear policy adheres to a minimum nuclear deterrence strategy, ensuring the ability to retaliate against any nuclear strike under any circumstances. Simultaneously, India's naval forces continue to expand. As a country with over 2,000 kilometers of coastline, India's Navy plays a crucial role in the Indian Ocean and the Asia-Pacific region. India has not only strengthened its naval equipment construction, but also deepened military cooperation with other nations, especially the US, France, and Japan, enhancing its military presence in international waters. Through these collaborations, India has improved its control over maritime routes and contributed to the stability of the Asia-Pacific region. In terms of the army, India still maintains one of the largest standing armies in the world, primarily composed of infantry, armored, and artillery units. India's geographical environment and border disputes have endowed the Indian Army with extensive experience in border defense operations. The Indian Army's role is indispensable in confrontations with Pakistan and, in recent years, with China along the border. India's border defense system is increasingly reliant on high-tech equipment, such as electronic surveillance systems and unmanned aerial vehicle reconnaissance to address the growing complexity of border security situations. Over the past few decades, India has also been steadily advancing military modernization, particularly in the Air Force sector. The Indian Air Force now boasts world-class fighter jet equipment, such as the Su-30 MKI and Rafale fighter jets, and continuously conducts high-level training for pilots in fighter operations. By enhancing its aerial strike capabilities, India's strategic influence in the Asia-Pacific region has been significantly strengthened. Additionally, the Indian Air Force's patrol capabilities in the Indian Ocean region have become a vital safeguard for maritime security in the area. As India's military modernization accelerates, it is gradually moving toward independence in its self-defense systems. In the development of high-tech weaponry such as nuclear weapons, missiles, fighter jets, and drones, India has not only reduced external dependencies, but has also become an integral part of the global military technology supply chain. India's defense industry continues to innovate and enhances its comprehensive national strength through technology transfer and collaboration. Another significant aspect of India's military history is its participation in United Nations peacekeeping operations. As one of the key contributors to global peacekeeping forces, India has dispatched tens of thousands of peacekeepers to various regions worldwide, participating in numerous peace-building and stabilization efforts in conflict zones. This has not only bolstered India's international reputation, but also reinforced its sense of responsibility and mission as a global power. Particularly in regions such as Africa and the Middle East, India's peacekeeping troops have enhanced India's voice in global affairs through effective mission execution. Moreover, India is heavily investing in cyber warfare capabilities. With the advent of the information age, cybersecurity has become a critical component of national security. India's cyber warfare capabilities are advancing to the forefront of the international stage. The Indian military has established dedicated cyber warfare units and strengthened its defense against cyber attacks from adversarial nations. Additionally, the Indian military is actively developing applications in artificial intelligence, big data, and automated weapon systems, gradually integrating these high-tech advancements into actual military operations. Despite the significant achievements in India's military modernization, numerous challenges persist. First and foremost, India's border issues with Pakistan and China remain unavoidable strategic dilemmas. Particularly regarding the Kashmir issue, the long-standing confrontation between India and Pakistan has not subsided, but has instead become increasingly tense due to both sides' nuclear weapons and military standoffs. Secondly, domestic issues in India, such as wealth disparity and ethnic conflicts, may also impact the stability of its military and the nation's long-term peace. Therefore, India must not only enhance its military strength, but also maintain a balance in domestic governance and diplomatic strategies. Furthermore, India's geographical location makes its strategic position in the Asia-Pacific region exceptionally significant. With China's rise in the region, the strategic game between India and China has become increasingly complex. China's military modernization and the Belt and Road Initiative have posed substantial strategic pressures on India. Against this backdrop, India has not only strengthened military cooperation with Western nations, but has also deepened security collaborations with other Asian countries to ensure its strategic status in Asia and globally. From early foreign invasions to becoming a modern global military power, India's military history spans thousands of years. Each war and conflict has profoundly shaped India's military forces and strategic thinking. India's military journey is a history of courage, wisdom, sacrifice, and adaptability, vividly illustrating how an ancient civilization continuously adapts and transcends the global strategic environment. Although India's military power has evolved from a colonial appendage to a global military power, it has always adhered to a core principle: autonomy, strength, and balance. Entering the 21st century, India's military role on the global stage has become increasingly significant, making it an indispensable international force. Looking ahead, India must not only address domestic and international security challenges, but will also continue to play an increasingly important role on the global stage. For India, its history serves as the cornerstone of its current rise, and its future military development will determine its position in the world order.